Case File TR 5143. Classification: Active Biological Anomaly. Subject: Philomena Crace, age 58, proprietor of Crace Fine Alterations, Black Damp, Virginia. Population of Black Damp at time of initial report: 307. Current population: undetermined. The first complaint reached the Grayson County Sheriff's Office on a Tuesday in March. A woman named Dale Purcell reported that her mouth would not open. Not locked, not swollen. Soon. She described the sensation as pressure without pain, as though her lips had been gently persuaded to remain closed by something finer than thread and more patient than a needle. When the ER physician at Grayson Medical attempted to examine her, he found what appeared to be a seam running along the vermilion border of both lips. The material was translucent, almost invisible unless the light caught it at the right angle. It was not nylon. It was not silk. The pathology lab could not identify the fiber, but noted it was flexible, biologically inert, and had a tensile strength inconsistent with anything currently manufactured. Dale Purcell had visited Crace Fine Alterations the previous week to have a winter coat taken in at the waist. The second complaint came 3 days later. A retired school teacher named Harold Vance reported that his front door would not open. He had locked it the night before, as always, and when he turned the key in the morning, the deadbolt retracted, but the door held firm. A carpenter was called. He found that the door had been sewn to the frame. Not glued, not nailed. Sewn, with the same translucent fiber, running in tight, even stitches through the wood, as though it were fabric. Harold Vance had hired Philomena Crace to reupholster a dining chair 6 weeks prior. The third complaint arrived that Friday, and it was the one that brought the Twilight Registry into the investigation. A teenage girl named Casey Lowe reported that a cut on her forearm, a minor scrape from a bicycle fall, had healed overnight. This would have been unremarkable, except that the healed tissue was not scar tissue. It was stitched. The edges of the wound had been drawn together by fine, translucent thread in a herringbone pattern so precise it looked mechanical. Casey Lowe had never visited Crace Fine Alterations, but her mother had. 3 months earlier, to have a prom dress hemmed. The pattern was becoming clear. Whatever Philomena Crace was doing, it was not limited to her shop. It traveled. It moved through fabric, through contact, through the ordinary transactions of a small town where everyone's clothes passed through the same pair of hands. Registry agent Ellison Voss was dispatched to Black Damp on March 29th. She arrived to find a town that appeared normal from a distance, but revealed its wrongness slowly, like a photograph developing in the wrong chemical bath. The door of the post office was sewn shut. The hinges of the library gate were stitched together. The windows of the elementary school had been sealed with a web of translucent fiber that caught the light like dew on a spider's web. Except it did not break. The fire department had been called to cut through it with thermal tools, and the fiber had not melted, had not burned, had simply absorbed the heat and held. Agent Voss visited Crace Fine Alterations at 412 Mill Street. The shop was open, A bell chimed when she entered. Philomena Crace stood behind the counter, a woman of medium build with silver-streaked hair, pulled into a bun held in place by what appeared to be a bone needle. She was sewing. The fabric in her hands was moving, not because she was pulling it, because it was breathing. Agent Voss identified herself and asked Mrs. Crace to explain what was happening to the town. Mrs. Crace set down her work, folded her hands, and said something that was transcribed into the case file word for word because Agent Voss asked her to repeat it twice. She said, "Everything is coming undone. I am simply holding it together." Agent Voss pressed for specifics. Mrs. Crace explained that she had always been able to see the seams in things, not just fabric. Everything. Buildings, bodies, the sky. She said that the world was stitched together from the inside, and that recently, the stitches had begun to fray. She described seeing gaps where there should have been continuity, openings where there should have been closure, loose threads hanging from the edges of objects that should have been whole. She said she had started small, a hem here, a seam there, repairing what she could reach. But the unraveling was accelerating. Doors were separating from frames. Skin was pulling away from muscle. The sky above Blackdamp had developed a tear, a long, pale rip that only she could see. And through it she could feel something cold and formless pressing against the fabric of the world, like a finger testing the strength of old cloth. She said she was sewing it shut. All of it. Every seam she could find. Every opening. Every gap. Because if she stopped, even for a moment, everything would come apart. Agent Voss asked what would come through the tear. Mrs. Crace looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "It already has." Agent Voss's report notes that at this point she experienced a sudden and acute awareness of a sound she had been hearing since she arrived in Blackdamp, but had not consciously registered. A faint, rhythmic whisper, like a needle passing through cloth. She looked down and found that the seam of her jacket sleeve had been altered. The stitching was different from what it had been that morning. It was tighter, more intricate, and it was continuing, slowly, stitch by stitch, as she watched, moving up the seam toward her shoulder. She left the shop. She did not return to the building. She filed her report from the parking lot of a gas station 4 miles outside of town. The Twilight Registry attempted a follow-up visit to Blackdamp on April 14th. The town was still accessible by road. The buildings were still standing. But the team reported an immediate and pervasive sense of enclosure. Windows appeared to be sealed from the inside with translucent material. Doors opened, but with resistance, as though the frames had been narrowed. The air itself felt tighter, denser, as though the space between molecules had been reduced. Crace Fine Alterations was closed. A sign on the door, handwritten in ink on cardstock, read, "Temporarily closed for repairs. All seams will be attended to. Please be patient. The work is larger than I expected." The team attempted to locate Philomena Crace at her home address, a small farmhouse on Ridge Road. The front door was stitched shut from the outside. The windows were sealed. Through the gaps in the translucent fiber, team members reported seeing movement inside. Not a person moving through rooms. The rooms themselves were moving. Walls breathing in and out. The ceiling rising and falling like a chest. The floor rippling, as though the house were a garment being adjusted by invisible hands. One team member, Agent Marsh, reported that the fiber sealing the front door was warm to the touch and had a pulse. He pulled his hand away and found that a single stitch had attached itself to his fingertip. It did not hurt. It simply connected him to the house, briefly, before he tore free. The team withdrew. Their report includes a note that during the drive out of Black Damp, the road behind them appeared to be closing, not collapsing, not flooding, stitching, the asphalt edges drawing together like the two sides of a zipper, the seam tightening with each mile they traveled, as though the town were hemming itself shut against the outside world. As of this writing, Black Damp, Virginia is not accessible by road. Satellite imagery shows a town that appears intact, but slightly compressed, as though viewed through a lens that is slowly narrowing. Communications with residents have not been established. The last outgoing transmission was a voicemail left on the Grayson County Sheriff's answering machine at 3:17 a.m. on April 20th. It was Philomena Crace's voice. She said, "I'm running out of thread." The voicemail was 11 seconds long. When the sheriff's office attempted to return the call, the number was no longer in service. Not disconnected, stitched. The operator recording described the line as closed at both ends. Case file TA Fix 143 remains open. Classification upgraded to active isolation event. Monitoring equipment has been positioned at the 3 remaining approach roads. The fiber samples recovered by Agent Marsh during his initial visit are being analyzed at a secure facility. Preliminary findings suggest the material is not synthetic, not organic, and not inert. It is something else. Something that sits between categories, the way a seam sits between two pieces of cloth. The analyst who made this determination has requested a transfer. When asked why, she said that the fiber sample in containment had begun to move. Not unravel, not decompose. So, it was stitching itself to the inside of the sample jar, slowly, deliberately, in a pattern that she did not recognize until she sketched it. It was a mouth, closed, neatly, permanently. She did not ask for the transfer again. She simply left. Her desk was found empty the following morning. Her chair was intact. Her jacket was draped over the back of it. The seam along the left shoulder had been altered.